In 1828, the American writer Washington Irving planned one last stop on his 3-year tour of Spain. But at Granada's magnificent Alhambra, a month turned into 6. Here the author fell under the castle's otherworldly spell, and like his character Rip Van Winkle, lost himself in dreams of the golden age of the Alhambra.
To the traveler imbued with a feeling for the historical and poetical, the Alhambra is as much an object of devotion as is the Kaaba to all true Muslims.
Thus begins Washington Irving's Tales of the Alhambra, a vivid and sometimes hallucinatory account of his prolonged exploration of the castle built by the last Moorish kings.
How many legends of love and war and chivalry are associated with this romantic pile. The reader may judge my delight when the governor of the Alhambra gave us permission to occupy his apartments in the Moorish palace. I remained spellbound for several months.
Only a few pictures existed to help the author envision the Islamic founders, whose holy law prohibited making images of human beings. So Irving relied on his imagination, on legends, and the Alhambra's dark magic to bring the spirit of the Moors to life.
Surrounded with the splendors and refinements of Asiatic luxury, they held dominion over what they vaunted as a terrestial paradise.
The true tale of the Alhambra begins 1,000 years before Irving's visit, high in the snowfields of Granada's Sierra Nevada mountains. The Moors had come to the Iberian Peninsula from North Africa on a quest for empire. But it was water that made their chosen land seem like the Koran's description of paradise, a garden flowing with streams. To the desert-dwelling Berbers who made Granada their home, the Sierra's melting snow brought the earth's most sacred element. In the 13th century, a Moorish king built aqueducts to channel the runoff to the summit of Granada's mile-long cliff. There he laid out lush gardens and began constructing a castle on the site of an ancient Roman fort. He dubbed it Red Castle, the Alhambra. This water magician was Ben al-Ahmar, Muhammad I. As his reign began, Moorish civilization was in crisis. Christian monarchs had all but killed off Islam in Europe. Granada was the continent's last Muslim stronghold. Yet in its final outpost, the Moors' dying culture flowered in a brief, golden age.
An abundant supply of water circulates throughout the palace, supplying its fish pools, sparkling in jets within its halls or murmuring in channels along the marble pavements. Another monument to the delicate taste of the Moors, who were indefatigable in their exertions to obtain that element in its crystal purity.
The delight of children is how one Moorish poet described Granada: a perpetual bed of flowers, a garden laden with fruit. Yet even as Muhammad created an oasis of Moorish splendor in Granada, he had to bend to the will of Christian kings. In an unstoppable wave of victories, the armies of Castile and Aragon crushed the last Moorish states. In 1248, King Ferdinand III compelled Muhammad to command an army against Muslim Seville, or suffer Granada's annihilation. The warrior Muhammad defeated his Muslim brothers, but as Washington Irving wrote, he came home with a heavy heart.
When the melancholy emperor approached, the people thronged forth. He was hailed with acclamations as El Khalib, the conqueror. Mohammed shook his head. "There is no conqueror but God," exclaimed he. From that time forward, he adapted this as a motto.
In luminous arabesque, Muhammad's words echo throughout the Alhambra. The plaster artwork, made from eggshells, almonds, and oil, began its long victory over the centuries. Its endless repetition suggests the force of the eternal and urges the faithful to contemplate paradise. The Alhambra's survival is due largely to the guile of the benevolent Muhammad. His rough red fortress betrayed none of the treasures of Moorish art within.
Mohammed had purchased peace by submission to the Christian yoke, but he knew it could not be permanent. Acting upon the old maxim, "Arm thyself in peace, clothe thyself in summer," he improved the useful arts which gave wealth and power to an empire. Mohammed commenced the splendid palace in person, mingling frequently among the artists and workmen and directing their labors. He passed much of his time in his gardens, which he had stored with the rarest plants and the most beautiful flowers.
At the age of 78, as his beloved nation began to bloom, Muhammad died. His bereaved subjects mourned him as a parent. To Western eyes, this ornate refuge of kings poses a mystery. The purpose of its rooms, like the towering Hall of the Ambassadors, can only be revealed by clues contained in its limitless, hypnotic decoration. Here, Moorish architects showed off their talent for manipulating light, coaxing it through intricately carved windows, once inlaid with colored glass. The channeled light fell on sparkling walls, bringing the room to shimmering radiance and revealing the name of the lawgiver, King Yusuf I. This hall was probably the throne room of King Yusuf, who took power in 1333. If Muhammad furnished the castle's spirit, Yusuf gave it its compelling physical form. In accordance with his role as lawgiver, Yusuf built the Gate of Justice, the Alhambra's main entrance, in 1348.
Those who pretend to some knowledge of Mohammedan symbols affirm that the hand is the emblem of doctrine, the 5 fingers designating the commandments of Islam: fasting, pilgrimage, almsgiving, ablution, and war against the infidels.
Yusuf passed out sentences of death for crimes of theft and murder, as his ancestors had done in the shadows of their Arabian tents. But when the day's work was done, Yusuf could simply pass through a door and lose himself in a world of earthly pleasures. The Hall of the Two Sisters is one of many rooms dedicated to the senses. How many joyful solaces for the eyes are to be found in it, exclaims one inscription. Even the dreamer will renew the objects of his desire. In the intricate stalactites adorning the hall, plasterwork at the Alhambra reaches its zenith. No 2 tiles in this honeycomb are exactly alike. This ceiling, which once glowed with red and gold paint, reflects the sun's movement as the day unwinds, making a light show for those with the leisure to see it. Here, Yusuf might pass the hours with a wife from his harem. A favored few lived in the palace. As many as 6,000 others, both Islamic and Christian, dwelt in dozens of houses that once crowded the fortress.
It is impossible to contemplate the scene, so perfectly oriental, without feeling the early associations of Arabian romance, and almost expecting to see the white arm of some mysterious princess beckoning from the gallery, or some dark eyes sparkling through the lattice. The abode of beauty is here, as if it had been inhabited but yesterday.
In the royal baths, the Moorish kings immerse themselves in the sensual delights of the harem, amid the sacred element, water. They lay on tiled seats bedecked with cushions, attended by their favorites, surrounded by nobles, bathed in water and cascading light. The harem bred both pleasure and envy, as the wives competed to provide a royal heir. Their jealousies broke out in intrigue, and worse. For the king's amusement, musicians played in the upper tier. Legend has it they were blinded, so they could not witness what went on below.
The peculiar charm of this old, dreamy palace is its power of calling up reveries of the past. I am prone to seek those parts of the Alhambra favorable to the phantasmagoria of the mind.
Moorish artists composed complex works by mixing simple shapes in endless combinations. Prohibited by Islam from portraying the human figure, the artist took inspiration from nature. Leaves plucked from their surroundings were transformed into geometric perfection. Script itself became a form of art. The Islamic world originated the graceful swirls of arabesque. These phrases praise Allah, the sultans, and nature's delights. King Yusuf and his son Mohammed V commissioned this artwork, adorning their majestic retreat as their world grew more imperiled. With righteous resolve, Christian armies tightened the noose on Islam. Now only Granada held out. For the Moors, this was their civilization's last stand. In the serene Alhambra, her embattled kings found comfort.
When one looks upon the apparently fragile fretwork of the walls, it is difficult to believe that so much has survived the wear and tear of centuries. Earthquakes have shaken the foundations, yet not one of these slender columns has been displaced.
The Alhambra stood up to the indignities of time. But during the reign of Yusuf, a crack appeared in the foundation of Granada itself. In 1340, Yusuf suffered a staggering defeat against the Christian monarchs of Castile and Portugal. Not long afterward, an assassin penetrated the Alhambra's serene seclusion. Wielding a knife, he stabbed Yusuf as he prayed. Outraged subjects burned the murderer in public. The lawgiver's eulogy proclaimed him to be gentle, learned, and just. The same could not be said for Granada's last king, Boabdil. He gained the throne through bloody murder and brought down the final days of Moorish Spain.
The effect of the moonlight on the Alhambra has something like enchantment. Taking lamp in hand, I sallied forth to make a tour of the ancient palace.
Awakened by ghostly moans, Washington Irving came face to face with some of the Alhambra's uneasy spirits. The Court of the Lions was the source of the haunting cries.
Sometimes they resembled the howlings of an animal. At others they were stifled shrieks mingled with articulate ravings.
Off the main courtyard in 1482, grisly murders had taken place. To clear Boabdil's way to the throne, his father, the king, summoned 36 rival claimants. One by one, the noblemen entered this hall. Here, the king's henchmen slit their throats. The ghostly alcove bears the name of the victim's clan, the Hall of the Abencerrages. Allegedly, their bloodstains can still be seen some 500 years later. For the murders, it is said, Boabdil was cursed. Dubbed the Unlucky One at birth, Boabdil began his reign with disaster. He was captured in battle and forced to kneel before King Ferdinand of Aragon. With Ferdinand's marriage to Isabella of Castile, the Moors faced an enemy of overwhelming strength. Of Granada, literally pomegranate, the two monarchs declared, "We intend to pick this pomegranate seed by seed." In November 1491, with the armies of Castile and Aragon encamped nearby, Boabdil cowered in the throne hall and negotiated his surrender. The last Moorish king handed over the keys to the Alhambra. In return, he was granted 30,000 pieces of gold and a principality on Spain's southern coast. News of Boabdil's surrender leaked out. A civil war erupted. In January 1492, Ferdinand and Isabella advanced on the Alhambra. Boabdil, it is said, slipped out through a back gate, so he would not have to see the victors raise a cross at the palace. Among the witnesses to this event was a Genoese sailor named Christopher Columbus. On a hill overlooking Granada, Boabdil gazed back on what he had given up without a fight. Here his mother mocked the luckless tyrant. "You do well to weep as a woman," she said, "for what you could not defend as a man." Muslim Spain's 8th century era was over. During the Spanish Inquisition that followed, the Alhambra became an army garrison. Much of its sacred art was defaced or destroyed. Thousands of Muslims were forced to surrender their faith. Thousands more lost their lives. In 1526, the Alhambra endured its final humiliation. Spain's King Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, established a residence at Granada and grudgingly agreed not to destroy the Alhambra's original structure. To the complex, however, he added a rotunda inspired by ancient Rome. It was never finished, yet its heavy-handed meaning is clear. Christianity's reconquest of Spain was complete.
As I sat watching the effect of the declining daylight upon this Moorish pile, I was led into a consideration of the light, elegant, and voluptuous character prevalent throughout, and to contrast it with the grand but gloomy solemnity of the Gothic edifices reared by the Spanish conquerors. The very architecture thus bespeaks the opposite and irreconcilable natures of the two warlike people who so long battled here for the mastery of the peninsula. Never was the annihilation of a people more complete. A few broken monuments are all that remain to bear witness to their power. Such is the Alhambra, a Muslim pile in a Christian land, an elegant memento of a brave, intelligent, and graceful people who conquered, ruled, and passed away.